Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. This is a wonderful opportunity to tell you about the classes that I teach, a little bit more about me that you might not already know, and also just how I would like my journey to unfold in public health. So just a quick overview of some things I'll talk about. Of course, I'll give a little bit of background about myself and about my teaching philosophy, my approach to teaching and learning here in public health, and I'll give an overview of the classes I teach. I know some of you have heard the titles, but you might not know all of the details about all of them, so I'll tell you how I approach them specifically and what materials I use in my classroom. And I'll also talk about some service activities and future plans that I have. So some of you already know this. I know my CV was floating around out there, but I have a background in physical sciences, and I came to graduate school here in social ecology fully intending to pursue earthquake geology. But then I took Social Ecology 200 with Dan Stokel's, a seminar on social ecology, and I started learning about social science for the first time. And I was immediately captivated and sort of found myself working more towards how the environment impacts human health. So still, of course, building on that foundation in earth science. And that's what I am interested in to this day. And so my dissertation research really focused on how the environment impacts human health and how we can, maybe build our environments to be better suited to the things that we need, and how we can restore our health in the environment. So that's why I am in public health today. That was probably my first introduction to public health. And I started teaching the practicum class in 2009, which was my first introduction to teaching for our program. So Deli had kindly mentioned my areas of research interest. They're very much in line with the dissertation work that I did. I'm really interested in how our own behavior impacts our health, and also just how environments impact our health, and also, of course, how we in turn impact our environment. I'm also interested in a lot of different implications for rapid global environmental changes and how that impacts our health. And I teach a couple of global health classes here, environmental quality and health, where I get to talk about those topics. And then finally, I'm interested in wellness as a tool for stress reduction and also for the prevention of chronic diseases, and specifically with a public health focus. And I'll be talking about a class I developed about that. These were just some pictures that I included in my dissertation work because my emphasis was about how environments, or how students would respond when they saw these pictures, how they would respond to the environment when writing a story about it. And we actually found that students that were writing creative stories about the top picture were actually more restored. They actually had a restorative experience and maybe even experienced a flow-like state from writing about the top picture, but not the bottom, very urban picture, even though they were very similar photographs. So some very interesting work. And it just goes to, it sort of is along those lines of the environment impacting our health very directly. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about just my approach to teaching, and it's been definitely an evolution, but I think a classroom is a very dynamic environment and things are changing all the time. But a classroom hopefully will promote debate and discussion and assimilation of these ideas, and hopefully allow and sort of even foster an exchange of ideas among everybody that's inside of this classroom. And I think that that role is the same, even if you have, my first practicum class was 17 students, all the way up to my largest class, which has been 250. I still try to bring all of those aspects into the classroom, even though the approach has to change depending on the number of students. My classes tend to be 125 or more students, and many quarters I'll have 350 students or more across my classes. And I think students, when they're really captivated by learning, are much more able to sort of integrate what they're learning into real world situations and into their own lives. And so that's what I hope that we can do. And in many of my classes, I really try to promote discussion, especially among people that have different backgrounds. I mean, we have such a diverse student population, and I really focus on saying, you don't have to disagree with us or agree with us, just let us know how you feel. We want to know what everyone's opinion is. And so, my overall goal is for students to really connect with the material in the class, whatever that looks like to them, and understand the material well enough that they can start to think critically about the topics and to sort of integrate and apply things in a real world situation. So I don't want it to just be theoretical. I want us to work to apply things beyond the textbook. And you know, this philosophy plays out in a variety of different ways. But most of my classes, we include similar types of discussions. So there are almost always team projects and presentations in class, and I think this is a great opportunity to expose students to group work. You know, they don't always appreciate working as a public health team, but many of them have said how beneficial this was, and especially people who have gone to graduate school or in other classes have to work as a team. They enjoy getting to do that, and it also often helps their oral presentation skills or just presentation making skills. To create a PowerPoint presentation. I also use a lot of instructional media, so I play a lot of video clips. Some classes I play music, depending on if it's appropriate or not for the topic, but I think that the video clips are really helpful, and they're always about current news that's in public health. So usually I read a paper, and then I find a newspaper article that supports this breaking you know, news, and I try to find a video about that, even if it's a news interview, because I think it connects students to this is what's happening now. You know, here this happened yesterday, or this is happening today, and that falls into line with the public health news story. So every class I begin with a public health news story that connects whatever the class topic is. So if it's global environmental change, I find stories about that. If it's Public Health 1, we can talk about a lot of different things. Just to sort of help students to understand that these are real things that happen in the world outside of our classroom walls. And so I start every class with that. And I also have taken it pretty seriously to talk about different options, career options in public health, because not all of our students go to graduate school, and I do like them to know really early on what their options are, and then we continue to reinforce this throughout all of their classes. Throughout every single class lecture, we have a lot of integrative discussion questions. So usually we'll talk about something for a while, and then I'll ask their opinions about it. And in some classes, this is very successful. Other questions, you can't get, you know, some questions they just won't answer. And so I've started using a different approach where we ask them to talk to their neighbor and formulate an idea, and then that's much less risky to share with a large group of people. So I find that to be more successful in larger classes. But it's always about integrating the material into some real-world situations. So I ask them, you know, how would that work at UCI? How would that work in another country? You know, whatever the topic is. And beyond the classroom, you know, the classroom isn't just this 3-hour block once a week or however you have it scheduled. I try to have virtual forums where we can talk all the time. And students often email me, and we talk on these virtual forums, and we meet, of course, and these are just ways that I provide individual attention in these large classes. It's really hard if you have 100 plus students to meet with each of them individually. So I try to do that, and I try to answer my emails the same day that I receive them if I can. And instead of just having a bulk office hour, I like to meet individually with my students, and I schedule appointments with them. So we have enough time to get their questions answered, and it's a pretty high show rate. I think I have 90% of the people actually show up for their appointments. So that's been pretty successful as a way of really extending the classroom and making sure that everyone can really feel involved in their own learning. And so I would say if there's a theme to what I've learned about my own teaching, it's that it requires a lot of reflection and reinvention and even adaptation, both for me and also for the students. So I'll give some examples, but when I do teach the public health practicum, I encourage the students to take some risks and to explore new writing styles. And it is risky for them, and they're worried because their grade depends on this. But it also requires that I reinvent the material all the time. Sometimes things just aren't working, it's not connecting with them. And so I really work hard to try to make sure if I have to completely change every lecture for the rest of the quarter, I'll do that so that it better suits the needs of the students. So I teach Public Health 1. I get to see these students as they're the most enthusiastic that they may be about public health, and they're exploring the major. Some of them aren't sure if they want to major in public health. And this is really, it's a great concept for this class. It's very broad. We cover all the major topics and sort of disciplines, subdisciplines in public health. And we also, if it's the very first time that we introduce them to careers in public health. And one of the supplementary recommended textbooks actually has a large discussion of careers. And so, you know, because many students don't know what public health is all about, I really try to encourage them to think about real world examples, and we bring that into the classroom a lot. One of the things that you'll see as a common theme for all of my classes is, of course, my focus on independent and critical thinking, and I do this through the assignments. So we have, of course, the in-class discussion questions, but also their individual research papers, and then team projects where they get to work as a team, which helps with the second point there. And really, all of my classes are structured the same, even though the topic is different. And so I think there's some consistency. The students often say, well, we know that that's what will be expected, and so they come sort of prepared for that. But another thing in Public Health 1 is this is really their first experience finding a research paper and trying to summarize it and figure out what they're talking about. And for a freshman or even a transfer student, this is a pretty big undertaking. But I try to introduce them to that early and use that in every class, so that by the time they get to practicum, they've at least been able to find some research papers that hopefully are on a topic that is of interest to them. But I try to take all of my classes beyond the textbook. I think that's something that's really important to me. And I do this in a few different ways in all my classes. I mentioned public health in the news. That's a strong focus in Public Health 1 for the reasons that I mentioned. I really want students to know that public health is happening outside of our class here at UCI. And I also play a lot more video clips in this class, probably 2, 3 every class, just to really get them acquainted with what this looks like in the real world. And also, I think video clips can provide much better examples, and a lot of people are visual learners, and I can explain the process of waste disposal, but if I actually show them, the waste disposal process and a truck driving to a dump and birds flying around everywhere, they have a much better sense of what that looks like than if I describe it. And of course, these discussion questions. And in Public Health 1, I've had some of the most lively discussions of any class, because students are really open to sharing their ideas and to saying, I disagree or I agree. And I think it works very well in this class because everyone's so new to the topic. No one sort of has these entrenched ideas. And recently I started, and this was in response to student feedback, I started talking about wellness and healthy environments in public health, because a lot of the students were saying, wow, everything we talk about is sort of about the conditions that make us sick. And so I started talking about the conditions that make us well. And so far that's been very successful. And we talk about the different dimensions of wellness and mental health and things like that. And that's been very successful. I also teach Public Health 2. This class tends to also be quite large, 125 plus every time. And I think my largest Public Health 2 class is about 250 students. That was last summer. I had 2 sections of 250 students last summer. And so Public Health 2 is great because we build on what we've learned in Public Health 1, but we introduce them to the process of case analysis. So now they know about public health, they have a sort of an idea about what we do here, and then they actually have to look at real-world problems and analyze them from this case analysis perspective. And so they get to look up the background on a topic, figure out the pros and cons of different solutions, and try to propose a solution that would actually work. And in this class we discuss career opportunities, but really they're in line with the cases that we're talking about. So we have cases that talk about county health directors, and cases that talk about nonprofit organizations that build water supply systems in Honduras, for example. So they really try to integrate that. And again, we do the same sorts of assignments where they have an independent research paper, a team project where they do a case analysis, and they get a lot of help and preparation writing the paper through working as a team. And we also focus a lot on how what we learned in Public Health 1 and how what we're learning in this class apply to the real world. So we want to prepare students so that when they see a problem, they can think about some different solutions to that. And I use that background in my other classes. So they get a lot of experience with hands-on case analysis. And I think they actually really rise to that challenge. It's not easy. And last summer, I was fortunate enough to work with Dr. Bick, and we updated the curriculum for Public Health 2. We have a really strong book that we use that has some great case analyses, but it's 10 plus years old now, and we wanted to sort of bring this class at least bring in some fresh cases. So we found some cases that cover the assurance and policy development and assessment functions of public health. And so that's what we focus on now, those three. And there are also some ethics cases. And we really try to integrate and expose students to all these things that they learned about in Public Health 1, but now they get to even see the real world sort of examination of that in this class. And part of that was I developed the PowerPoint slides for each of these cases, which I've shared with Dr. Bick and also Dr. Sammy, who is in the room as well, so that when they teach it, there's some consistency across our classes. This year I started teaching Public Health 60. Some of you may not have heard of that class. It's a Category 2 general education requirement. It focuses on the science and technology gen ed category. And this is really a class that in a very broad way covers how pollution impacts human health, if you had to narrow it down to one sentence. So there's a lot of different things that we talk about in this class, but it's designed for students that don't have a public health background. So that we're sort of taking it back even maybe more basic than Public Health 1, because we don't know if they'll even continue into public health. So a lot of the students are international studies majors or sociology majors, and they're just sort of got to check that box on their gen ed requirements. But a lot of them have switched majors, or I've seen some familiar faces from my other classes, so I know that they may be public health majors. In this class, one of the main takeaways that is unique from what I've already talked about is that I really want these students, regardless of their major, to understand the role of public health in addressing these environmental quality issues. And so that's what I try to illustrate, and also how they can use public health in their own degrees. Because especially the international studies majors, there's a lot that we're doing in public health that's very relevant to them. And so we try to give real world examples that would be relevant to those students. So I did update the curriculum. This class used to be taught by Dr. Stern, and I added a textbook because I thought it was helpful to have a grounding in that. And I picked a textbook that was written by someone who was a former member of our own faculty. He was jointly appointed with the School of Medicine and also the School of Social Ecology. And so many of the examples in this textbook are local examples. So we have examples from Irvine Ranch Water District and the city of Riverside and other places. So the students are often more familiar with this. Many of our students are from this local area. And so I think that helps to illustrate also the role of public health in this local area. And I do play a lot of video clips in this class because I think that, like in my other classes, it really helps to illustrate and drive home some of these core concepts that we're talking about, that if a student doesn't have a lot of public health background, they might not understand. And so that's how I try to connect with them in this class. And I teach a similar class, or it's at least along a similar line, but it's an upper division requirement, health and global environmental change. So this is for public health science majors, although anyone can really take it. And we often get students from across campus. Anyone can enroll. And so I did have some international studies majors. And this quarter, I actually had a student who was an exchange student from Japan take this class. And he tells me that he wants a completely different career now. So it was sort of inspiring to him as an international studies major in Japan to sort of see what we're doing in public health here. So this course really discusses all of the different scientific underpinnings for how health is influenced by these rapid, large-scale global environmental changes like climate change, and we talk about issues like food scarcity and food security and things like that. In this class, in addition to all these themes that I keep bringing up about independent and critical thinking, the class is really based on working as a team. So we try to get students, they pick their own teams, 5 people, and they work all quarter as this team to write a proposal for a project. They write a 12-page research paper, and they also give an in-class presentation for 10 minutes about the results of their research. And the idea with this paper is that they pick a country and they pick 5 different problems, some sort of global environmental problems that are happening, and they try to figure out real solutions to these problems. And for many students, this is their first time trying to formulate a solution to a problem in public health. We learned a little bit about that in public health too, but they get to really use the scientific literature to support why they feel a certain way. And one of the requirements is that the solutions have to be culturally relevant and feasible. You can't try to apply what we do here in the United States to countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, unless they really would work. And so I think they really rise to this challenge. And for some students, it seems like a big project, but it's usually based on the quality of their teammates, which they get to select. And I think at the end of the quarter, it's such a great experience to hear from all of them what they've learned about their country and how they propose to solve these problems. And I have updated the curriculum to this class a couple of times since I started teaching it. It's sort of been an evolution. And what I'm striving for is to have a book that the students can really connect with and use for examples for these projects, because a lot of them don't have a lot of exposure reading about, these fine-grained details of environmental problems all around the world. And I found this book, Our Global Environment, which really focuses on the health perspective of things happening in the environment. And what I love so much about it is the examples have a strong focus on how human population impacts health, which is what this whole class is about. And I think that has really made a big difference. I think this quarter was a lot more successful in trying to, sort of inspire in these students to think about how our own actions impact the larger environment. And when I was doing this redesign, I worked with Dr. Brown, who couldn't be here today, because he teaches global health. And students would often tell us, both of us, that the classes were very similar. And I think there's only one topic that they actually have in common, but when I was revamping it, I wanted to make sure that we were actually offering two discrete classes and not just approaching it from the same perspective. And then, of course, finally, public health practicum. Which, I love teaching this class. I think I love the challenges inherent in guiding students through such a rigorous class. It's not for everyone, I'll say that, but I really, I really enjoy it, and I always have. So I did first teach this in 2009. There were 17 students, and then I think there were 115 last quarter. That might be the record, which is soon to be trumped by Stephanie Leonard this summer, if anyone's keeping track of these records. But we do have a lot of interest in our program, and so this class is continuing to expand. So many of you know this is the upper division writing requirement. It also requires a 100-hour internship on top of these weekly paper assignments that they write. And it's a great class because it really emphasizes and exposes students to writing for a variety of public health audiences. So they learn to write opinion editorials for newspapers. They learn to select and then critique a peer-reviewed journal article, which this is the first time that many of them have ever had to look critically at a journal article. They've always just assumed that anything that was published must be true and perfect and the best study in the world. And so for a lot of them, it's an interesting methodological challenge because they have to go back to their methods background to figure out, what some limitations in these studies might be. And then they also write NIH grant applications using the criteria for NIH. And of course, they're not original ideas. We ask them to use existing research from this article they've critiqued to do that. But they do, in just a few weeks' time, fill out the entire requirements for an NIH grant, which is quite rigorous, I think, for undergraduate students. And these are professional quality papers, so they often ask, what are you judging us against? And I say, these sorts of applications, these sorts of op-eds. We're looking at peer-reviewed, the kinds of feedback people get on peer-reviewed articles. That's what we're looking for. So they learn a lot, and it's a great experience for them. I think all of them come out of there with enhanced communication skills, both from speaking in class and also from learning to write all these different papers. And also they learn a lot about how all of their coursework in public health is directly applicable to the workforce and to their own work and the work environment, because they get to go and use their organizational skills, or some of them actually write grant applications for nonprofits that they work for during their 100-hour internship. Many of them get employed, get job offers from these practicum sites because of the skills that they learn, not just in practicum, but in all of their courses. So I've heard they usually reflect on that during one of the assignments, and they'll say, my organizational skills that I learned in this class, or time management, which I learned in this other class, really helped me in my internship. So I think that's important. One of the other things that I do is when other faculty teach this class, I really try to help them as much as possible, and I provide all the rubrics for the class, give them all the slides that anything that they need so that they can teach this class. so that things are consistent. And we also have team grading sessions. So we actually this quarter met in here, and there were 15 graders, TAs, readers, all sorts, undergraduates, graduate students, and we would meet until the wee hours of the night grading papers with both Dr. Sammy's section and my section. So that way we're consistent across the sections, and I really enjoy doing that. One of the things that I spend a lot of my time thinking about, and also working with Stephanie Leonard in Student Services, is to try to ensure that this class is scalable. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but we sometimes have small sections of this, and we can do a little bit more in class, and then sometimes we have 115 students, and we can't have individual presentations in class because they would take the entire lecture time for the entire quarter. So we're working on how to scale this best to suit the needs of the class. One of my main focus points beyond teaching them how to write these different papers is really a strong focus on careers. Many of them are just finishing up here at UCI, and so we talk about the things that they might be going through. A lot of them are doing job interviews or interviews for grad school. Some of them, most of our students indicate that they're taking a year off. So they're getting ready to apply for graduate school, but they haven't quite gotten around to it yet. And so we talk about this process, what does this look like? How do you apply? How do you write a personal statement? How do you respond to job interview questions that might be tricky? Sometimes we have mock interview questions in class, or students will share an interview question that was recently asked of them. So that's a strong focus in this class. And I actually this is the book that we use in Public Health 1 as our recommended text. So I return back to that, but I discuss things in more detail, salary requirements, things like what would their on-the-job tasks be like, how much education do they need. A lot of our students are very concerned about if they need graduate school. They always say, can I get a job in public health without going to grad school? And so we try to, address some of those questions and, give them some insights into that. But in this class and in many of my other classes, one of our guests is present, I like to utilize student feedback to really change the course in whatever way that I can. And one way that I do this in practicum is I actually ask the students things that they'd like to learn more about, which was why we spent so much time this past quarter talking about career opportunities in graduate school, because I could tell that they just didn't know much about it. And so I spent basically the bulk of the remainder of the quarter discussing this with them. And they also wanted to know more about research methods and statistics, because they're not familiar with this, and this is something that we ask them to critique and to write about in their review papers and also their grant proposals. And so I would try to encapsulate these mini methodological reviews and statistical reviews, as well as these career opportunities in the class. In the virtual forums that I use a system called Piazza, which was recommended here by the Teaching and Learning Center on campus. And I think it's really one of the best platforms I've ever seen. It's a lot more advanced than some of the functions we have in EEE. Students can post questions anonymously. I know who they are, but the rest of the class doesn't know who they are. And I think it's really useful because we get very good questions and clarifications about the assignments, and I can sort of address it to the whole class audience and give examples from past papers that were successful, and everyone benefits this without sort of spamming everyone's email inbox all the time. So it's a really important resource for students. And I find that even the shy, timid students who won't say a word in class and are sort of maybe even afraid to meet with you in office hours for whatever reason, they really respond well to these forums. And it's just one way that I can provide more individual attention. And in this class, we do receive a lot of emails from students asking for clarification because the topic is so new and so different than anything that they've ever been challenged to do before. When we talk about careers, we also have graduate student guest speakers who tell us all about their own paths to public health and what their future and current research interests are. Amy, who is present, has spoken now twice, last spring and also in winter quarter. And then Jamie spoke last quarter about her adventures with Patch Adams in Cuba and about driving truck, as you can see here. I did ask her if I could use that picture. No idea? No, you should ask her about going to Cuba with Patch Adams. It's a really great story. But the students write research summaries about these presentations, and what is so great is how inspired they are by hearing from our own graduate students. And, you know, Dr. Sammy and I told them all about our paths to public health, but I think in many ways it's more interesting to hear from the graduate students that are students now and going through this process and sort of, you know, the struggles that they might face and what they're interested in. So we get rave reviews, and so of course, thank you for always coming when you're invited. This year I started mentoring some students in directed studies, which is Public Health 198, and also in the research, different research programs that we have on campus. So I worked with 4 different directed study students, some of them for multiple quarters, and I also co-mentored with Dr. Bick, Eileen, who was one of our public health honors students, and I worked with Angela, one of our campus-wide honors students, and, you know, different projects. And one of the ways that I approach this, and I'm fortunate to have so far a small group of students interested in working with me, is I can ask them what they're interested in learning about. And so, you know, someone said to me, I want to learn to write a literature review, so that's what we did. Or one of them wanted to learn to write a research paper, so that's what we did. On a topic of their choosing. And I had one student, Jessica Adame, who wanted to put together a presentation series to give to her Orange County Catholic Church. It's a primarily Hispanic congregation, and she wanted to have a series of lectures about basic public health issues like heart disease and diabetes and things that she felt like were really impacting the Hispanic community in Orange County. And so we worked on that last quarter, and she's going to begin giving that lecture series this summer. So that was something that was really a lot of fun for us to work on. And I try to attend as many public health student events as I possibly can. So this year in April, I was a panel member for the Honors Experience Day. We had a couple of students stop by, but I found that it was a really good opportunity just to share with the students that did stop by what we're all about in public health. They didn't ask so much about honors, but they wanted to know how big the classes were, and, you know, how do you meet with faculty, or, you know, what kind of research do you guys do? And the parents asked more questions than the students. It was a really interesting day, and it was myself and 2 of our undergraduate students sat on that panel. And last month, I moderated a public health oral presentations series as part of the UROP symposium. So most of the honors students presented research talks during the same afternoon session on that Saturday. And so I moderated that session for them, which was a lot of fun because I think every single one of those students has been in one of my classes. And so it was sort of a nice reunion. And I had been working with Eileen and attending their presentations throughout the year, so I was already sort of well-versed in what their studies were about. And a couple of years ago, in my health and global environmental change class, one of the students asked me if I would come and give a presentation on sustainability to a lecture hall on campus, which is what this very strange looking maybe shopping bag is. And so I actually put together a workshop on making an old t-shirt into a reusable shopping bag as a way to sort of encourage sustainability. And so there were about 20 or so members of this Mesa Court Residence Hall that were there, and I brought my sewing machine and scissors, and they brought puffy paint, and everyone made at least one, often several shopping bags, and it was really great. And I bumped into her not long ago because she was still very early in her career on campus, and she said people were still using these things. So I thought that was a really, really successful thing. And, you know, many of these students, you know, they're not seamstress majors, or, you know, they're not going into fashion design, so for many of them it was the first time using a sewing machine, so it was sort of fun to teach basic sewing machine safety, you know, keep your hands away from the needle type things. So that was a whole new type of teaching experience, and it was really a lot of fun. I have a few classes that are coming up on the horizon. One of them is Natural Disasters, Public Health 90, and I know Lisa recognizes this picture of Wallace Creek. This is in the Carrizo Plain along the San Andreas Fault, and this stream drainage has been offset. It wouldn't normally jog like this. It's been offset by several earthquakes over time, so this is the quintessential place for studying earthquakes in California. This class is also a Category 2 general education requirement like Public Health 60, so I'll be teaching that coming up next week, and also scheduled for spring of next year when Lisa's going to be on sabbatical, so I'll be teaching it then as well. And this fits in nicely, of course, with my background in geoscience and my master's work in that. And I was very fortunate enough to be able to develop a brand new class on public health and wellness, which really came out of student feedback and my evaluations, and also just things that students said to me when I would teach about healthy environments and wellness in Public Health 1 and my other classes. And so I got to thinking, you know, we could have a whole class about the conditions that make us well at all these different levels of analysis. And so this has now gone through the curriculum committee, and it will be an upper division elective for both the policy and science majors in the 2 topic areas that I've listed here. So I'll start teaching that next week, and then also again it's scheduled for winter of next year. And you know, this was a great opportunity for me because I really learned firsthand about some of the criteria for learning and how to really build a class that would satisfy upper division requirements for both our policy and science majors. And one of the realizations that I had was that there wasn't a good book on this. This is sort of a very novel topic. And so because Dr. Bick and I had had such success creating our own textbook, I did the same thing. And I picked, you know, chapters on community health and on stress and, you know, individual stress and on corporate wellness and all these things. And I stitched this together into this custom textbook for the class, which I think will be a really good resource for the students. And there are also additional supplemental readings from all sorts of categories. But I think, you know, I think this will work out pretty well for them. And very luckily, there was the whole Apple a Day link here, which I rather enjoyed. Next year, I'll also be a little bit more involved with the Public Health Honors Research Series, which I'm really excited about, and I'm going to be working closely with Dr. Bick to guide our record 12-student cohort through this process of designing an original research study with their faculty mentors. I'll be mentoring 2 of these students myself. Both of them are interested in stress in some way. One of them is interested in sort of long-term stress and quality of life dealing with cancer survivorship. And one of them is very interested in how UCI students respond to stress and some different activities they can do to reduce their stress. So that plays in very nicely with the work that I have done in the past. And I'm excited about working with them and of course with Dr. Bick. And summer, you know, this is the time when we get things done around here, right? It's a little bit more quiet. And so I'm going to continue some of the work that I've already been doing with student services. Stephanie Leonard and I have a long list of projects to do. But the first one is really, we want to put together a careers sort of resource page that's part of the public health website. And this came out of feedback that I have from students where they don't really know what to do or where to go. And, you know, I realize this when I talk about these topics in my class. So we're going to try to build something that will at least help them a little bit along their way. Stephanie Leonard and I are also going to refocus on making sure that the curriculum for practicum is really tight and as good as it can be, because we have a lot of different varieties of class sizes now that often range from 60 to 130 from quarter to quarter, and I'm really concerned with making that class scalable and still meeting the objectives of the requirement and, you know, our review committees and all of these sorts of things so that it fulfills this requirement for public health. And then finally, an idea that's been in the works for a long time, and Dr. Bick and Dr. Brown know about this already, but we really need some sort of website or web page on public health that talks more about the honors research that our students do and gives examples of their projects, because I think it helps the current students quite a lot if they can have these sorts of examples. So that is on the list of summer projects that we will tackle this summer. And, you know, many times people ask me if I could envision you know, a class that would be a good addition to the curriculum. And I've got lots of ideas about that, but I think something that's maybe more of a pressing need and something that I've realized might be very important from just reviewing student papers in all these classes, right? I'm lucky enough to see these students when they come into the major and when they graduate, and at many times in between. And so one of the things I've realized is that additional instruction on writing specifically for public health audiences would be very useful before they arrive in practicum. And, you know, in Public Health 1 and 2, they often really struggle with this, and those aren't necessarily the places to really teach them how to revise papers and edit them over time. So one course that I feel would really sort of address this need and make a meaningful contribution to the undergraduate curriculum would be a lower division writing course. And I've called it Public Health 3. It's just the next one in line. That's its code name in my mind. But really what I would like to see for this class would be a focus on techniques for developing an informed point of view and then supporting that point of view with the literature, with papers that they find. And I think if we can manage to do something like that, I think students would be much better prepared for writing in all of their public health classes. Our students are lucky enough to have access to that very rigorous humanities-based writing course that lasts a whole year. But as a result, they have a very different style of writing. They write for humanities. And just to explain one perspective about a paper, they would introduce it by saying something like, Dr. Runnerstrom in her paper in American Psychologist entitled this, and then they would quote from the paper instead of actually just synthesizing the things that they're reading. And so we find in all of our classes, or in all the classes I teach, that whole paragraphs are taken up introducing a paper and 4 words about saying something about it. And so I think if we can teach them to write for public health, that's also a useful skill. Writing for humanities, very useful skill, but writing for public health I think would be a real advantage for our students. And many of them won't go to graduate school. That's where many of us learned how to write well, was in graduate school, but I think if we can set them up for that a little bit sooner, and I hope that I have the opportunity to develop that class. So I think if I had to say anything, I would say definitely that I'm a teacher at heart. It's what I really love doing. I love meeting with students individually in a group setting. I love learning from them and sharing what I know about public health with them. And over the years, public health has really shaped my worldview. It's changed the way that I see everything in the world, and it's this filter through which I view everything. And I really hope that I can inspire our students to sort of integrate the science and the art of public health into their own lives, and to really, go forward with that and do inspiring things. That's what I would hope for. All right. So questions, thank you very much. It was really fun to tell you about that. So what questions do you have?
Is there a cost to Piazza?
A cost to Piazza? No, there is no cost. Good question. Yeah, it's free for everybody. And you can really, I can show you more about it, you can really tailor it in different ways. You don't have to allow anonymous posts, but I like to because I feel that students are much more able to contribute questions when it is anonymous. So yeah, no cost, it's one of the few resources out there that's free. Yeah, and it was recommended by the folks upstairs, so yeah. Yeah. And actually a TA, Shaw Steiner, was the one who pointed out to me that he had used it when he TA'd for your practicum class and that it was really successful. So I said, okay, we'll do an immediate adoption. We'll try this out, and it worked really well. We tried it last summer. Yeah. Yes?
Well, I guess except for the fact that it's anonymous, does that work better than there's the forum option?
The EEE forums, yeah, and I find that it's, what's really nice about it is you can set up how often you want to get emails about things that are posted. So you don't have to remember, we're very busy people. I have a hard time remembering to check EEE message boards, but it emails me and it gives you a list of all the questions. And it emails, you can have teaching assistants signed up for the class as well, so they get those emails, or not if you want to handle it yourself. But I think it's been a really useful extension of the classroom for everyone, because I'm involved, the TAs are involved, and as the instructor you can endorse answers, so students will answer each other's questions, and you can say that's a good question and that's a good answer, and I think it's a really powerful tool. Yeah, and it's searchable, really easily searchable, so they can search for things. Yeah.
So your concept of scalable courses I find very interesting, and I wanted to, maybe you can say a little bit more about when you have these large classes, 250 students, even 125 I think.
Yeah.
And you like to promote discussion and group projects, and
Yeah.
and I think most of us will just feel intimidated by doing that. So how do you, either you look at scaling down from such a, so let's say you have to teach a class of 20 students.
Right.
And then the following year it balloons because everybody says this is a great course.
Right.
And then they enroll and we forget to put the max cap on. For
Yes.
So how do you scale these kinds of things that would ordinarily be considered small class strategies like the discussion and the group projects that don't become overwhelming or not easy to manage in
Yeah.
large.
It's a good question, and that was something that was not always easy for me because I was also intimidated by even, assigning a group project to a class. There's sort of this groan that happens because, they're intimidated by it, even though it turns out to usually be a good experience. But one thing that I do with regards to discussion is that I post questions on a slide that looks exactly like this with this big question mark, and I usually say something like, discuss with the person next to you this, and then we will discuss it as a group, because I think that takes a lot of the intimidation out of it, because at least there are two people in the room, or maybe even a few people around them who feel the same way. And often they will be sitting next to someone who is less inhibited by these large group environments and who's willing to speak up. And I think that also works to just provide individual attention in these large groups, because I try to, if I'm in a classroom with one of those big plinth-like stages, I'll jump off and go back to the back of the class where someone is, whispering to try to get the question out, and we'll repeat it to the class. And so I try to, really encourage them to talk with one another, because I did have a class once. I used to not encourage them to talk to each other, but I had a class where I could not get them to give their opinion on the weather today. It didn't matter what it was. It's raining. Everyone was like, okay, And so I started the very next week. I thought, I'm going to ask them to just discuss this amongst themselves and then tell me. And immediately they start, people in the very back are talking and participating. And so I've started using that ever since, and I think it really breaks down barriers a little bit. And with the groups, I let them pick their own group mates because I think to me that's really important. And also I sort of tell them this is the equivalent of like speed dating, but go ahead and ask a GPA, ask if this person is going to ever contact you again, ask if they plan on dropping the class. It's okay to say, are you a serious student? I only want serious students in my group, or I only want people who want to go surfing in my group, or whatever it is. And so then students have a little bit more control over that, and I think they enjoy the process more. And the groups, I think, are a lot more successful. I have groups of 5, which even in a 250 class, I use groups of 5, because I find that that's about the maximum controllable number before we start getting people who aren't participating, and I don't want that. So groups of 5 can sort of self-regulate, I've found. That's a lot of groups of 5 in a 250 student classroom, but it also gives them a base for studying together for the exams. They often sit together in class. We often ask them to sit together in class. I know when Amy comes in Public Health 2, we have them sit in their groups so that they can talk amongst themselves and then give answers to some of the prompts that she asks. And so group work is really important, and we try to say this is a little support system, and then hopefully they go on into other classes with one another. So hopefully that's a way of making it feel a little smaller. I hope that, does that answer? Yeah, okay.
Have these strategies in the large classes help maintain attendance, class attendance?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked about attendance. Yeah, I'm glad you asked about attendance, because I've wavered between, giving participation points in class or not. And I'm actually working right now with student services, and also we've been in contact with the registrar to try to get a better system for actually knowing who is in attendance in class, because as you guys all know, we have to now say if someone gets an F in the class, why they have an F. Did they stop attending? If so, which week did they stop attending? Or did they earn their F, or what it is. And I immediately responded to this by saying, we don't have good systems for tracking this. Those little clicker devices are not really foolproof. And I've seen students, I gave a guest lecture once recently for another faculty member, and they had 5 clickers on one desk. And I thought, okay, so that's participation for the whole lot, the whole group in this case. And so I don't know, I'm still working that out, but I think attendance is usually high when they know that there's going to be something asked of them, or sometimes the groups will let us know who's not in attendance, but I've sort of gone back to requiring attendance. It's required in practicum. And I verify their attendance not just with a sign-in sheet, but we send around a sign-in sheet, and we also have them turn things in during class. So I didn't realize that handwriting analysis was part of the job duties, but it turns out I have learned to recognize handwriting immediately. And we often have students that will sign each other in, and so we've had some issues with that and have reported that for academic dishonesty just last week. So, they have lots of good ideas about how to get around these systems. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
follow-up question.
Yeah.
What he asked. So you were talking about that you use oral presentations that, of course, are not really doable for
Right.
more than 100 students.
Right.
But I was wondering if you change the strategy if you are teaching a course during the academic year or during the summer. Because during the summer there are 5 weeks.
Right.
During the year 10 weeks plus discussions. So
Yes.
you can do a lot of things during discussion that you cannot do during the summer.
Absolutely, and my only class that has a discussion is practicum, and so the students do speak more in practicum. When the practicum class is smaller, I will have them give individual presentations in class, but 90 is the maximum where there's actually enough time to teach them how to write the papers and hear from them, because we have to give presentations for about 5 weeks. And everyone gives a 3-minute presentation, and I already have them preloaded and ready to go, and that still takes 5 weeks. So in the summer, my classes are actually larger, and so we have much less time all the way around because we have many more people. So one of the strategies that I've adopted, and this was just through talking ideas over with especially Dr. Bick, who has a lot of experience adjusting her classes to different sizes, I have the presentations in Public Health 1 and 2, they're done virtually now. So they design a presentation as a group and they submit it. A lot of times they'll submit their notes with it or like an audio recording of how they would have presented it. And while I recognize that's not exactly the same experience, it still gives them experience putting together a presentation, which we give them a lot of feedback about how that would have been, how that would have probably gone over had they given it in class. So that's one way that I have grappled with that, because 250 students, even if you had groups of 20, it would just be a lot to try to get through. And so in Public Health 173, we actually do give them 10-minute presentations, but it takes 2 full weeks of the quarter to do that. And we use our time very efficiently in there. But this quarter, I found that everyone was able to do that without an issue. And it was the largest class I'd ever taught for that class. It was 143 students, and they all presented. So that's a good question. I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
I'll follow up on the attendance
Oh,
question.
yeah.
So one of the things that vexed many of my colleagues is when students started bringing their laptops to class. So they may be in class, they may be attending, but not focusing.
Right.
And I've heard senior faculty members entirely banning,
Right.
don't open your laptop. If you do, you're out of the class, especially in courses that are taught by the case method, where you really want everybody to pay attention.
Right.
And others have encouraged it, so that questions that you begin with, what's new in public health this week, they can actually go and do a 5-minute search and come up with interesting things. And others are kind of ambivalent. Okay, well, you can soft away if you like. I'm just gonna give my lecture and leave. What's been your approach to the laptop and not knowing what they're actually doing?
Well, it's now beyond the laptop, right? Every student has 5 devices, and right, where they have iPads and computers and phones, and but I think that I've more embraced that, but that's probably my bias coming from a technology background. But I also tell them at the beginning of the quarter that I know that they'll be, in spring quarter, everyone's shopping for summer apartments on Craigslist, everyone's on Facebook all the time, and I just acknowledge that, sometimes they'll be, if it was happening right now, they'll be trying to watch the World Cup. These things will be happening during class, and it's not necessarily a good use of their time. So I say, there are so many external demands for our attention. If you can try to focus in just for a short time. And one way that I try to break it up, so it's not just, we do a lot of discussion questions, and I also play these video clips, and some of them I try to find things that are quite funny or that they might find shocking. Or, Matt Damon he has that charity water.org, and he does a series of very funny videos about World Toilet Day, and the students really pay attention to this, and everyone looks up from whatever they were doing when this is going on. And Bono is in some of these videos, and it's a really, I try to play videos like this so I can at least get their attention for some time, and I think you can hold it when you talk about that. And the discussions, most people sort of pay attention to that. Or, sometimes I'll just say, I can tell everyone's really engrossed in Facebook or whatever you guys are doing, but, we're going to just finish up our talk, and then we can all go home. So I think I've sort of embraced it. I did have a student once who was blind, and so they would receive the lecture slides and would blow them up so that they could look at them in class. And that was when I really sort of changed my opinion, because I used to be a little bit more opposed to technology in the classroom, and I especially wish there was a way to shut off Wi-Fi. But then after that, I realized what an important tool it is for some people. And some people don't write quickly anymore. They don't write by hand very much. They're not good at organizing their thoughts when they write by hand. And so I think I've sort of come to the point where I understand how important it is for many people, and that for some people it's just their process. In practicum, I noticed that hardly anyone uses a laptop. Most people print out the slides and write notes in the margins. All of my other classes are very different than that, but there's something about that class where they bring a paper copy of the notes and mark them up like I've done here. Yeah.
I'll ask one more. So, going back to the idea of scalable courses,
Yeah.
one of the courses that you taught before, Public Health 1, I think for the first time in the fall will be an online
Right.
version of the course. So I wanted to get maybe you haven't done online courses, but how do you see that trend? And is that something that you consider to be radically, how would you go about transforming what you usually do in class with
Yeah.
these case studies?
Right.
It's still experimental in many cases, but
Sure. I think, I would take a similar approach. Of course, the assignments would probably be very similar, but I think there would have to be weekly exercises where they were checking in and telling us about their learning. And I think you probably do something like this in Public Health 1 already, but I can't imagine just sort of letting them out there on their own for 10 weeks without, more involvement with us. And I know the lectures are usually pre-recorded, but I know also there's a lot of teaching assistantship that has to go into communicating with the students because it's all virtual. And this is something that even back in graduate school, there were predictions that it was the end of, the classroom wouldn't be needed anymore. And I think both of them complement each other very nicely. And I can see classes having a classroom component and also most of it even being electronic. And I know many classes are run that way at UCI. So I think there would just have to be a lot more checking in and a lot more of that extension of the classroom into this virtual environment. Where everyone was sort of responsible for their own learning or felt more like a part of this community. Yeah, that's a good question. Yes?
I think most of the people in this room know that I'm the teaching assistant and reader coordinator, and
Right.
I saw a point on one of your slides, granted it's summer plan, so I'm sure you haven't developed it much yet,
No.
but I wanted to know if you could share any initial thoughts you had about particularly the scalability of the practicum course.
Yeah.
It's such a resource-intensive course, and in a continuing environment of low resources,
Right.
how, if you have any initial ideas on how we can keep this course sustainable with the levels of support that we have.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and we've talked about just our struggles with getting good resources for this, and I think this quarter was probably the most challenging ever in terms of TA allocations for that particular course. My course had 4 undergraduate readers, and I think Dr. Sammy's course had 4 undergraduate readers. And while undergraduates are very skilled, they've all passed this course, they don't have the same level of, sort of detailed analysis, and they're not really familiar with these papers other than having written them once themselves. And so that was a very different type of grading, and it was really a big struggle. And also they have all these social events going on. Their lives are packed. When in graduate school, people, they're just showing up for grading. That's like our social life is Wednesday nights. So, everyone was always here. No graduate students missed, and the undergrads were often sick, or they had a sorority event or these end of the year banquets and things like that, and we just worked with them. But I think one of the things that we've talked about, and I've also talked about with Stephanie Leonard, is just that when we have these really big classes, we do have the need for a lot more TAs, not just readers. And our graduate student pool is sometimes completely exhausted already, and so we did have to go to the undergraduates. And it's a good experience for the undergraduates, but it is not as smooth smooth from the perspective of whoever is instructing the course, because I actually reviewed all of the papers that were graded by the undergraduates, so it was about 50 papers every week, just because the students in the class get a lot of pushback and they don't want their papers to be evaluated by undergraduates. And I've tried selling it in 100 different ways and I haven't really found one yet that has been ultra successful. But if I write comments on their paper as well, they tend to be more okay with that. So I would review every paper. So I think it's going to be one of those strategies that we have to come up with, because the course is set up in the way that it was because it was sort of required for our accreditation to have this rigorous course. Everyone has to attend. We have these weekly writing assignments. So I've tried to scale that class in such a way where it is a little bit more flexible. So if we have really large sections, we give virtual presentations instead. And I do all of the classroom and all of the grading that comes out of the classroom, things they do in class myself, because I know that I don't have the TA resources to sort of farm that out. And I enjoy doing that, actually. I wouldn't want my TAs to do it, because that's how I get to know the students, is by reading their prompts every week that they write. But I have some ideas. I think using undergraduates for the course is not ideal. It's a really big struggle, but that's what we had, and we were happy to have them. We were really grateful to have them, but it's just not an ideal world. We would have more TAs and more readers, and I think the most successful quarter was actually winter, because we just had the right amount of support, and then we just didn't have as much. So that's okay. We all survived, and we learned a lot. And the undergraduates learned so much from doing that, from actually doing the grading, but it's just not as smooth of an experience. Yeah.
Okay, we want to make sure you get some food before you wrap up. But thank you so much.
All right, thanks very much, you guys.